Childhood habits that seem weird are actually the brain's code, revealing how we think, learn, and create. Let's begin. Number 6, Pint-Sized Teacher. Have you ever seen a child marshal a crooked line of stuffed animals and launch into lessons on numbers and spelling, as if running a tiny academy? It looks like pretend play, but underneath is what researchers call spontaneous pedagogical cognition. The mind shifts from merely recalling facts to restructuring them so someone else can learn. The moment a child steps into the teacher role, advanced metacognitive gears start turning, tracking how learning unfolds, predicting where confusion might appear, and reshaping the explanation on the fly so it actually lands. That ability matures into the adult everyone consults when a workflow is opaque or a tool is finicky. The colleague who translates complexity because they instinctively simulate another person's thought process and pinpoint the exact step where meaning slips. Children who teach aren't parroting, they're interrogating ideas, stress testing each link in the chain, and rebuilding the concept until it holds. Teaching deepens understanding through the protégé effect. Preparing to instruct forces you to arrange knowledge more systematically, surface connections you had glossed over, and expose gaps you didn't know were there. So when a child corrects a plush giraffe's counting, contrasts cat with cap to make the vowel sound pop, or inserts a simple bridge example right where the pretend learner gets stuck, they're running tiny communication experiments that tighten their internal model. These childhood teacher games aren't a cute detour from learning. They're powerful, improvised laboratories where explanation, attention, and self-correction braid into durable comprehension, and where the future explainer at work quietly begins to take shape.
Number 5, Rulebook Lawyer. Do you remember being the kid who could recite the rules of every board game by heart and quietly combusted when someone tried to make it more fun by bending them? While your siblings turned Monopoly into a house rule carnival, you were spiraling about property taxes and whether free parking secretly paid out a jackpot. That wasn't stubbornness, it was your brain craving logical consistency. Developmental research on how children think shows that kids who insist on playing by the book are already doing systems thinking. The mind is building frameworks that only work when their inner logic stays intact. In your head, games aren't casual distractions. They're closed systems with predictable outcomes. Change a rule mid-play, and it feels like solving an equation while someone keeps swapping the variables. Of course your intuition balks. That demand for consistency is practice in understanding how parts interact inside larger structures, inputs, constraints, feedback loops, and edge cases. It's the same impulse behind the child who asks why bedtime shifted 15 minutes on a weekday and what that implies for tomorrow. From early on, you were stabilizing norms, checking how pieces fit, and correcting tiny misalignments before they jammed the whole mechanism. As an adult, this often becomes a low tolerance for hand-wavy estimates on important procedures. You know systems depend on tight fits between their components, and you can smell failure by noticing small rule deviations, a skipped validation that corrupts a report, a missing step in a recipe that leaves the sauce runny, just this once exception that quietly breaks the queue for everyone else. Your inner rulebook lawyer didn't make you pedantic, it trained you to think like a logic architect, someone who designs with constraints in mind, anticipates boundary conditions, and prefers proofs over vibes. You simulate what will happen if one element is tweaked, predict where the structure will creak, and insist on standards not to kill creativity, but to keep outcomes fair, stable, and repeatable. And that precisely is how complex problems get solved, not by improvising away the structure, but by honoring it so solutions hold under pressure. Number 4, the sign-reading sleuth. You were the kid who read every street sign out loud on car rides, recited the ingredient list on the cereal box at breakfast, and turned grocery runs into impromptu reading contests. While other kids begged for candy, you narrated the entire trip. Strangers alternated between amused smiles and gentle shushes, and your parents sometimes blushed in public.
Beneath that chatter, your brain was running an automatic decoding routine, snapping to attention whenever symbols appeared in the wild. Most children see a red octagon and treat it as a picture that means stop. You, instead, saw STOP as 4 distinct glyphs. Without trying, you were mapping letters to sounds, chunking syllables, and tying form to meaning all at once. That habit foreshadowed strong crystallized intelligence, the ability to apply stored knowledge and experience with speed and precision. The kids who can't not read the world often grow into adults who notice what others skim past. You're the one who remembers exactly how a phrase was worded 3 conversations ago, who catches the stray typo in an important email, who spots the odd data point that doesn't belong. A fierce curiosity about symbols trains pattern recognition, fuels careful research, and helps connect bits of information that seem unrelated until you stitch them together. You're still reading signs, only now many of them are invisible. Subtle social cues, procedural tells, tiny system indicators that predict what happens next. Where most people register a blur of impressions, you pick up the microsignals, a misaligned label in a process, a hesitating verb in a promise, a missing legend on a chart. The same urge that once made you read every billboard now helps you read the room, and more importantly, read the structure underneath it.
Number 3. The tiny Why-Interrogator. Why does the moon follow our car? Why do dogs pant? You were the child who turned simple questions into marathon explorations, so relentless that tired adults secretly Googled physics just to buy a minute of quiet. What they sometimes mistook for attention-seeking was actually your mind running causal chains. Developmental research shows that kids who push extended why sequences are already testing hypotheses the way scientists do. Each why is a provisional model of how the world works, and each answer spawns a fresh model to probe. With every loop, you weren't collecting trivia. You were refining the machinery of explanation, mapping mechanisms, not just memorizing facts. Your brain, in effect, was experimenting through language. A why proposed a cause, a reply supplied data, and the next why tightened the fit between the two. Over time, your questions got sharper because shallow answers wouldn't do. You wanted the gears underneath. What triggers what, in what order, and under which conditions. Most children accept surface stories. You kept drilling toward first principles because some quiet intuition told you that real understanding is the power to predict. Causes lead to effects, and patterns hold across contexts. Grown up, that habit becomes an edge in research, design, and innovation. You read the fine print, not from paranoia, but from an urge to see the whole causal architecture of whatever you're touching. You notice when a claim skips a link, when a metric confuses correlation with mechanism, when a fix treats a symptom but leaves the driver intact. You're the colleague who asks the deceptively simple question that reorients the room. What has to be true for this to work? That is the same instinct that once chased the moon down the highway, an insistence on tracing lines from premise to consequence until the model is sturdy enough to trust and flexible enough to build on.
Number 2, the Wordplay Linguist. You were the kid who minted nonsense words that somehow made perfect sense. You could flip any conversation into a pun-laced game that left adults either roaring with laughter or completely puzzled. Wordplay cracked you up because it felt spread like jam on toast and popped up everywhere, from street signs to breakfast tables. This wasn't mere silliness. It was your brain displaying a meta-linguistic awareness, noticing not just what words mean, but how they work. Researchers in bilingualism and language development have long observed that children who juggle rhyme, double meanings, and playful substitutions are practicing flexible thinking about language's underlying structure. Your mind treated words like building blocks, ready to be taken apart, recombined, and reassembled into surprising shapes. That flexibility predicts divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple solutions by approaching problems from unexpected angles. Kids who tinker with phonemes and syntax often grow into adults who spot non-traditional connections and devise creative solutions others miss. As you got older, that instinct became a strength in writing, teaching, and explaining. You can render complex ideas through clean analogies, shift tone to meet different audiences, and fine-tune nuance without losing clarity. And it runs deeper than style. Linguistic creativity correlates strongly with abstract reasoning. When you play with double meanings or coin nonsense words, you're training cognitive agility, the same muscle that lets you manipulate symbols, work with models, and handle concepts. On the job, this playful precision becomes an edge, in crisp prose that moves people, in classrooms where the right comparison unlocks understanding, and at negotiation tables where phrasing shapes outcomes. You're still playing with language, only now that flexibility bridges communication gaps and helps others grasp ideas that once felt too abstract to touch.
Number 1. The Magpie Memory. You were the child your parents couldn't keep around during private conversations, the one who remembered every promise and every aside, then casually repeated a verbatim line from the grown-up's chat at the most inconvenient moment. Mom says her boss is mean, you'd announce at dinner, not to stir trouble, but because your mind recorded not just what happened, but exactly how it unfolded. The phrasing, the timing, even the tone. This wasn't ordinary recall. It was a kind of high-definition event memory that stores sequence, context, and detail as if your brain were running a tiny boom mic and camera. Under the hood, your memory was stitching moments together into coherent episodes, who said what, where, and in what order. Instead of saving only the emotional headline, the park was fun. You encoded the particulars with near forensic precision. That level of specificity signals strong integration across memory systems. You weren't just filing facts. You were binding them to places, voices, and causal steps so they could be replayed accurately later. As an adult, this becomes an analytic edge. You notice when today's statement conflicts with last week's position, and you can't easily ignore it. Your mind runs a quiet form of version control. It tracks earlier claims, flags inconsistencies, and asks for the missing link that makes the story hold. People may call it a good memory, but what they rely on is your ability to keep the timeline straight and the logic intact. There's a deeper advantage too. Detailed episodic memory fuels analogy. Because you remember concrete situations so clearly, you can spot meaningful parallels between past and present. This feels like what happened over there, and then borrow the right playbook. You use those historical patterns to forecast outcomes, steer around repeat mistakes, and choose interventions that actually fit the moment. In short, you see current events as part of larger patterns. Where others were call only a blur, your magpie mind collects the shiny but crucial specifics, context, sequence, and nuance, and turns them into a map. That map helps you detect trends and connections most people miss, not because they're careless, but because they simply don't remember the surrounding story the way you do.